Today's episode is brought to you by Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the show, go to patreon.com/JoshuaRevelis and become a $2 backer today and get early access to the new episodes. I'll be leaving a link down in the description to the page, but for now, on to today's episode. You're listening to the Augmented Experience podcast. My name is Joshua Revelis. I'm a student, musician, and a gamer at heart. Join me as I sit down with fellow enthusiasts to talk about what's going on in the technology, business, and gaming world. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, everybody, welcome back to the show. My name is Joshua Revelis. I am your host as usual. And as you guys voted on the poll, we're going to be talking about the Mac Pro, which I think in terms of what everything Apple has done so far this year, especially after, or specifically the week after WWDC or WW, after this conference, I think overall this is probably the most controversial thing Apple made that came out of this conference. Obviously, when we talk about the Mac Pro, we're obviously going to be talking about the monitor and the stand, because I know everybody's been wanting me to talk about that and give my take on it. And I think it's going to be interesting, especially because obviously there's a lot of negatives in here, because I think what we should really think about is, one, address the idea of who it's for. Clearly, we know that this is for professionals only. This is not made for consumers and probably not prosumers. Maybe some prosumers, depending, but based on what the base model is, I highly doubt it. And then we have to look into, the argument that people make about the pro market and how accessories are very overpriced in the pro market naturally, and how I kind of say that argument is true, but I think it also falls apart a little bit in some sense, especially with Apple's slogan of being the best value, because anything comparable to this machine would be a lot more expensive. And we're going to be talking about those things because I think it's very important, and you actually see a difference clearly, because I think Apple was on the money when they did everything else except when, well, obviously the MacBook, I would argue with the MacBook Pros, those weren't really, I'd say, comparable, I think, in my opinion. But I think when you look at the iMac Pro, which is the main thing I want to make a comparison here, because I think it's the easiest reference point we can come up with, is that when you try to build something like the iMac Pro, specifically the iMac Pro, and you get all the parts that the base model has and everything, and you buy them all separately, it actually comes out to be more expensive than the iMac Pro that comes already together for $5,000. And this is where we run into one of our first issues with the Mac Pro, and I really want to get into this because there's really a lot to digest. That when you look at the base model of the Mac Pro, yes, it clearly is not good. It is, in my opinion, based on what we're seeing, it is a ripoff. Clearly it is. Like, there's no debating it. Like, whether you want to argue it or not, there's no debate. It's clear. When you buy all the parts separately and everything, even a casing the same size, you notice that there's not a small difference like there is with the iMac, where you could build the iMac, like buy all the parts separately and build something similar to it, and it actually ends up being more expensive than the iMac Pro together, like already from Apple. When you look at the difference in price between all the parts like bought separately and a different casing compared to the base model of the iMac, to the Mac Pro, there's a $3,000 difference. With the buying all the parts separately is $3,000 cheaper than buying the Mac Pro altogether, the base model, all the parts inside. There's a $3,000 difference, and obviously that's a big issue, because $3,000 difference just to have the privilege of Mac OS is not good. It's not. Whether you try to argue it, that's up to you, but you can't. And sorry for a little bit of noise in the background. And it's because we're installing Gigabyte Wi-Fi, which I'm going to talk about that eventually on the show. But I think it's important to keep in mind that that $3,000 difference is huge, and that goes against what Apple was trying to state with the Mac Pro, was any comparable machine would be way more expensive than this, and this is the best value, which clearly not, especially with the rumored price that the maxed out version of the Mac Pro is going to be like $35,000. If it's $35,000, then I get it. It's for professionals, but that's a lot. That's a car essentially. You're buying a brand new car for that, and I think that's, I'd say, outrageous. But also you have to keep in mind on who this is for. So I think probably the first question regarding, if we were to ask a question, should you buy the base model? The answer is no. You should never buy the base model of the Mac Pro. For its value and everything it has, obviously 16 gigabytes of RAM. The Radeon Pro, if I'm correct, if I have it on the website, it says it's the, let me check this to make sure I have this correct, because I have the website pulled up as well right next to me to confirm. It's a Radeon Pro 580X. That is a very consumer card, very cheap, very affordable card. Obviously, not really good card. You guys already know my opinion on AMD cards to begin with. I don't think AMD cards are good. I think in terms of CPUs is where they excel the most, but in GPUs it's not that good. Like Nvidia always will stomp them, but that's kind of that. So clearly I do not recommend anyone buying the Mac Pro base model. If you're going to buy any professional machine from Apple for the base price, I would just buy the iMac Pro specifically, because not only has a better graphics card inside of it, has the same amount of RAM. Like basically it's almost identical. The only difference is it's a monitor with everything inside of it, and it's $5,000 instead of $6,000. And also one thing to keep in mind is 256 gigabyte of an SSD. Even though Apple's SSD are very fast, very great SSDs, that's still not enough for a professional machine costing $6,000. That should have been base 1 terabyte plus SSD easily. Like, you're not going to charge $6,000 for a 256 gigabyte SSD. Like, no. $1,000 gaming laptops do that, but they also give you a big hard drive as a result. You're not giving somebody 256 gigabyte SSD for a base. No, that's ludicrous. In terms of the monitor, which I think this is where I'm more positive about it, because yes, in my opinion, when you're comparing the monitor to the Sony ones that are meant for referencing, if I'm correct, I remember a lot of people, I think it was Jonathan Morrison who actually showed the comparison, and he had the monitor in front of us. A lot of those monitors cap out at 1080p, and like I said, they're made for referencing, and same specs and everything. And Apple was actually on the money with that the Pro display is a better value than those other displays, because instead of paying the $26,000 for those models, or even higher for those things, you're going to only pay $5,000. That's great. I think in terms of the professional market, the Pro display is a huge improvement for that market. Not only is it 6K instead of 1080, like, it's absurd on how much benefit you get out of that in the professional field than everything else. I think that was Apple's best call in making that monitor. Now, there is a huge problem, because while I love the monitor, I think with the fact that they decided to separate the stand from the monitor was a bad call. Especially because if you look at buying any other monitor, they always come with the stand. And I think if Apple would have just sold the stand with the monitor and just charged $6,000, nobody would have cared. And this is coming from my friend Edgar, who I've talked about him a little bit. He's a professional audio engineer, and he even told me about it. He gave me his opinion on it. He's like, bro, I'm going to be honest with you. If Apple would have just sold the stand with the monitor and charged $6,000, nobody would have batted an eye. But the fact that they intentionally separated them and showed people the price, you got people talking, because then it makes them feel like they're being nickeled and dimed. And this also leads into the argument about the professional market with accessories being expensive. And Jonathan Morrison did a video on this talking about it. And while I do agree with Jonathan's stance on, yes, that, naturally the professional market is going to be very overpriced, and they are going to nickel and dime you. For example, he brought up examples with the Red cameras. Like, you can buy the Red camera for like $8,000, but then you have to spend like, $800+ for the card, the video card. You have to spend like all these other things to make it work. And while I do agree that is true, I think in this situation, it's very debatable. I think it's also because you have to keep in mind, like, yes, I understand that the camera and everything, yes, I get it. You also have to keep in mind that every other monitor comes with a stand, no matter what. They always have to have something mount. Even 4K plus TVs, like, they come with stands, like little mounts, like little holding things for them. Clearly, they do. And I think it's just ridiculous that you have to nickel and dime your customers for the stand. The stand would have sold itself. You don't need to, like, nickel and dime them to get it to sell. Like, people were going to buy it no matter what. It would, because in terms of industry standard, yes, it is above everything that the industry currently offers, and it's a great value because it's significantly more discounted than the comparable models. Anything comparable to. And I think that was just a really bad call. And even MSI like kind of made a joke about it, where they showed the $1,000 stand and then they showed their new monitor. That was a very good monitor. It's like $1,300, $1,299 to be exact, but rounding up is like $1,300. But obviously, yes, in terms of comparing that MSI monitor to the Pro Display, no, the Pro Display slaps everything in its market. It's just ridiculously good. I think the Pro Display is a great thing. I just think that the fact that you had to separate the stand instead of just selling it together and just raising the price, people would have still paid $6,000 for that monitor and not batted an eye, because they're like, you know, that's a great price for the people that it's for. They would have been like, that's incredible. We're saving a lot of money and it's better than everything on the market. But the fact that you had to separate them, and, you know, it pissed people off, clearly, because it made them feel like you're nickel and diming them. And that's obviously a bad call. You don't want to do that to the professional market. You do not want to do that with them, because it will piss them off. And it is true. Even the prosumers, they were pissed. Like, everybody else was pissed about it. We're still talking about it. We're making jokes about it. Like, and I think that's just something we have to keep in mind. Now, one thing I did want to bring up that I think was interesting to me was my viewpoint on this machine's performance specifically. Because like I said, I think that the only people that should ever buy this machine is going to be people that are literally working for animation studios. If you are a big multi-record company, like music company, essentially, if you're a record company, this machine is perfect for you. If you are a professional that does this for, like, either music editing, you know, you're an audio sound engineer, if you're a animator, this machine is for you. Clearly, the base model is not for you. It clearly isn't. I would definitely upgrade, definitely pick out some of the parts. And the thing is, this machine is also upgradable too. So that's a good benefit, because that's what the professional market does. The professional market is always, you can upgrade and fix things on your own. That's what the market does. And one example would be my Sennheiser headphones. That's what Sennheiser does. Like, Sennheiser, my 280 Pros, they're professional headphones. They're meant that you can fix them on your own. They sell the parts and you can fix it on your own, and they show you how to. That's what professional market does. Consumer is like, if it breaks, you just buy another one. And I think that's a good call, the fact that they made the Mac Pro able to upgrade stuff inside of it. Obviously, I don't know to what extent. I don't know. We still don't know. We haven't really seen that much about it, because Apple is very limited on how they allowed people to see the machine. But I think in terms of performance, I think the machine is phenomenal. I think it is a great step for the industry. However, we run into a lot of issues when we start talking about more specifics. And I think that's I think it soured the note for people. Like, especially after the iMac. The iMac Pro, that was crazy to begin with when that thing first came out. Like, if you guys remember, the iMac Pro, when it launched, was a very controversial machine for Apple. Especially because they were charging $5,000 for the base. And we were making fun of the base model. I was still making fun of it. I thought it was stupid. And to my surprise, they managed to make something more expensive, yet even less powerful. And I think that's kind of worrying, because it's like, well, you build these machines for the professional market, yet they're lacking, especially because the iMac, the main thing that people had with the iMac Pro was it was meant for the professional market and prosumers, but it didn't have professional usability in the sense of, you know, upgradeability. And that's what professionals like. They like upgradeability because it allows their machines to run longer and then have to worry about buying a new one. And obviously, yes, you could not upgrade the iMac Pro unless if you bought it upgraded. Like, people have tried. Linus, like, if you remember the whole incident Linus had when he accidentally broke his and the whole issue he went through trying to fix it. Like, yeah, it was a bad call, and it was not a good look on Apple. And then the fact that I was really excited when the Mac Pro went back to the old cheese grater design. As much as the design looks funny and corny, I think it was still a good idea to go back to it. I think because that's what people miss, is when they think of a Mac Pro, they think of the old cheese grater design, the old big box. They think of that. And obviously, yes, it's not as big as it was before, and it is a more redefined square box with cooling and everything. And that's the main thing, is people want to see how this thing cools. But I think the fact that there are big compromises that shouldn't have been made really sours it, because I even told Edgar, we were talking about it, because Edgar in his studio uses 2 iMacs, and Edgar's considering of upgrading his machines, and I told him I would just get the iMac Pro. The Mac, as much as I like the Mac Pro, I think it's still, in terms of value, you get more value out of the iMac Pro than that, because yes, it's an all-in-one and you have to buy the bigger thing, but overall it ends up being cheaper because you're not spending as much. Even though, yes, the iMac Pro is a very expensive machine. It can get really expensive. Like, before they updated it with more RAM and the better graphics card and things like that, it capped out at like, I think it was close to like 13,000 to 15,000, 18, like somewhere in that range. It was that expensive. And that was the most expensive machine Apple had at the time until the Mac Pro came out, which we still don't even know how much the Max version costs, because they're talking about 1.5 terabytes of RAM. They're talking about like 4 graphics. Like, we're talking about so much stuff inside this thing. And Xeon processors are not cheap either. They're really expensive too. And I think it's just something we have to keep in mind, guys, because this is very, very concerning. I think this kind of soured the launch of it. Everybody was excited. They were waiting because the trash can was a flop. The Mac Pro that came out a while back, I think 8-10 years ago, I think, if I'm correct, in 2008, the trash can design, if you guys remember that one, that everybody bashed. Yeah, that was a failure. That was horrible. It was just terrible. That was the worst decision Apple could have made, was making that thing. This was a step in the right direction, but due to some of the things that they did, just soured it completely. And that's why I said, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more, that next week's, or later this week's, Friday's episode is going to be over iPad OS, which I think is overall the most enthusiastic thing that came out, because it was the most refreshing and it was the most innovative thing Apple had done in a while. I think in terms of announcements, it was the better announcement, because it provides a brighter future for the Mac or iOS's ecosystem, because the iPad is now playing a huge role. This kind of leads into the thing is, do I believe that the iPad would replace the Macs? Obviously not. I think the Macs will remain the powerhouse juggernauts that they are. The iMacs are incredibly popular. The iMac Pro is very powerful and popular for the people that buy it. For the people that do YouTube and record in 4K, 8K videos, very popular thing. Obviously musicians love those machines. They're really good. They're good all-in-ones if you buy a good configuration for what you need it for. And then you have the Mac Pro on it. It's like, I don't know. I get it. I think for the people that it's made for, I think the base models, obviously, they're not buying the base. Clearly, the people that are going to buy this machine are not buying the base model. They're clearly going to buy the big upgraded version. Clearly, they will. We can't debate this. They're going to buy one of the upgraded versions, clearly. And then obviously they'll just keep upgrading it from time to time because they know what they're doing. But I think in terms of addressing who this machine is for, I'm going to say it flat out. I don't think prosumers should even touch this machine. Consumers, don't even get near it. It's nowhere made for you. It's not made to be affordable. If you want affordability, that's what the MacBooks are for. That's what the iMacs are for. Not the iMac Pro, even though some people say in terms of borderlining the connection between prosumer and professional, I think, yeah, the iMac Pro is a great value, especially compared to if we're comparing base models, clearly, like the 5K display and compared to, the iMac, because you have to think into account. When you think of the Mac Pro, you have to include the display. And that's over base model plus display plus stand is like $12,000, clearly. It would be cheaper if you get the VESA mount instead, but nobody's going to get the VESA mount. You're going to want the stand because, duh. When you compare the base model of the iMac Pro to the Mac Pro, that $6,000 difference isn't justifiable because you get an all-in-one that is more powerful. It has I don't know. I think it does have, no, I believe it does have a similar CPU, just a little bit underclocked version. Same amount of RAM, better graphics card, actually, more storage. And the display is just as good. It's a 5K display instead of a 6K. Obviously, it's nowhere going to be as good, but it's still a really good display for the price. And $5,000 for that all-in-one is a really good price. I will honestly, and I will say this, I believe that, if you are in the market for a professional computer, I would just get the iMac Pro. And because you get more value out of it, clearly. Even if you spend a little bit more, you still get a more beefed up machine. Because if we're going to compare a $12,000 version of the iMac Pro than the Mac Pro, then the iMac Pro is going to stomp it because of all that money extra you're spending on upgrading it is basically more productive for your money than buying a base model Mac Pro and the monitor. I love the monitor. I'm not going to stand here and tell you the monitor sucks. No, the monitor is incredible. It's better than every monitor you'll ever see in your life. But it just doesn't help the situation when the computer it's meant for is not that good. And I think that's really sad because everybody was hyped for the Mac Pro, and then when they saw what came out, they're just like, ugh, like, no, this ain't it. And that's all I can really say, guys. Like, there's not really much positives here besides the display, and I think just the comparison with the iMac Pro is overall the best comparison. Like, you get more value out of the iMac Pro than you do the Mac Pro, even in the base model. The $1,000 difference, and you get better performance from the iMac Pro than the Mac Pro, and I think that's really sad. But that's all I really got for you guys. Like, I don't really know what else to say because I'm saving a lot of my thoughts with the iPad OS because that's what I'm more invested in, because I think it's, when we talk about it, you're going to see there's a lot of potential on the table. And I think that's what I want you guys to see the most, is the potential of the iPad because of iPad OS. Even though, yes, iPad OS is basically just a version of iOS modified for the iPads, it still adds a lot of useful things that changes how the iPad is going to be used going forward. And I think it's a great transition. But we're going to talk about that on Friday, so I hope you guys come back and listen. But until then, I thank you guys for listening to this episode. I love you guys to death. I know this comes off more as a negative episode. I know that. I'm aware of that. But I think I'm not going to say it needed to be done, but I think we had to go in that direction because there's not really much positive with this situation, guys. To be honest, there isn't. And as more information comes out and as people start to actually get to use the machine, then we'll get to see more. But I think we'll probably talk about it again when we get to the actual machine being out and seeing people use them, because that's obviously what we need to see, because there's probably more issues that we don't even know. We're just going over the spec sheet. We don't even know how this thing is going to cool properly, if it cools properly. Like, there's probably more issues that we don't even know. But until then, we just got to hope and pray that everything goes well. Got to wait till it comes out, and then we'll come back to this thing. But until then, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. I love you guys to death. You guys have yourselves a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys on Friday. You better come to see that episode because it's going to be really fun, because you guys know I love the iPad. But until then, I love you guys to death. Take care of yourselves. Bye, guys.